welcome. Take a breath. Let the noise of the present fade and gently step back in time. Tonight, we travel to the misty, soot-stained streets of 19th century Britain, a world of gaslight and gravel, of factories that never slept, the Victorian era, an age of invention, empire, and quiet misery. You'll drift through the cramped back rooms and foggy yards of the industrial slums. Witness the quiet suffering of forgotten children and observe the stark contrasts between wealth and want. There's no rush here, just the slow rhythm of another time measured in footsteps on cobblestones, in the creak of cartwheels and the low murmur of working lives. And let your thoughts meander through the shadowed lanes of Victorian London, Leeds, and Manchester. Let's begin. Imagine yourself small, just 6 or 7 years old, not yet fully grown, bones still soft, joints still forming, and yet already employed in one of the dirtiest, most dangerous jobs of Victorian Britain. You are a chimney sweep's apprentice. In the dim gray of early morning, long before most of the city stirs, your sleep is broken not by sunlight, but by a sharp voice or a rough shake of your shoulder. There's no time to linger in the warmth of your straw-stuffed bedding. No room either. It's shared with several other boys, all of them thin, pale, and coughing in their sleep. The smell of soot, sweat, and damp would hang thick in the air. You dress in the same clothes you wore yesterday and the day before, a loose shirt blackened by use, wool trousers worn thin at the knees, a small cap, no shoes. They'd be useless in the tight flues anyway. Your tools are simple: a brush, a scraper, a ball of rope, but the most essential instrument is your body, narrow, nimble, and expendable. That's why you're here. The master sweep doesn't say much. He walks ahead, whistling quietly, leading you from house to house with the indifference of a man who has done this routine 100 times before. He carries the contracts and takes the pay. You carry the risk. The houses of the wealthy, those with multiple hearths and towering chimneys, are your workplace. At each stop, the drill is the same. You're brought to the hearth. The fire has been out for a few hours, but the bricks are still warm to the touch. You kneel. A candle is held near the opening, its flame flickering and smudged with soot. Then, up you go. The flue is narrow, just wide enough for a small child to squeeze through. You climb with elbows and knees, scraping upward inch by inch, brushing soot as you go. Every movement is deliberate. Too fast, and you'll stir a cloud of dust that stings your eyes and chokes your breath. Too slow, and the master may assume you're resting, which invites punishment. It's dark, always dark, a choking kind of dark, filled with the gritty texture of soot. It sticks to your lips, sneaks into your ears, coats your scalp. It clings under your fingernails and settles in your lungs. When you sneeze, the handkerchief comes away black. Some flues are angled, twisting around like elbows. Some are crumbling with loose bricks that scrape your back or knees. In older houses, the chimneys are irregular to narrow in parts, jagged in others. You sometimes hear rats, or bees, or worse, Phil, a sharp drop where the brick has collapsed. You learn to pause, to listen, to breathe shallow and climb steady. Occasionally, a boy gets stuck. In those moments, time slows. You can't go up, and you can't go down. The air becomes thick and stale. Panic flutters like a moth in your chest, but you've been told, don't cry, don't scream. If you're lucky, someone will pull you out with a rope. If not, well, Some boys never come back down. On rare occasions, the flue is still hot from a recent fire. These are the days you dread most. Climbing through heated brick, you feel the air searing your skin. You move quickly, too quickly, brushing without care, just to get out. The burns may blister later, but at least you survived. At the end of the work, you descend, covered in soot from head to toe. You look like a shadow of yourself. Your reward, a piece of bread, maybe a copper penny, occasionally a sip of ale from the master's flask meant to clear the soot from your throat, but it burns more than it soothes. You wash, when you can usually in cold water, from a basin shared with others. Soap is rare. Most days, you simply smear the soot around and dry off with a rag, and then you do it all again. Day after day, some children develop chronic coughs, some develop sootwort, a form of cancer caused by constant exposure to tar. Others age too fast, backs hunched, joints worn, voices raspy before they're 10. You are always tired. But worse than the exhaustion is the way the world treats you. Passers-by rarely meet your gaze. To most, you're just a dirty child, a fixture of the urban grime, no different than a cracked chimney pot or a crumbling curb. Eventually, the laws began to change. In 1788, the first bill was passed to limit the use of child sweeps. It had little impact. Later, in 1834, and again in 1840, further restrictions were introduced, but enforcement was lax. It wasn't until the late 1860s, after decades of activism, that the use of climbing boys was finally outlawed. But by then, thousands had already passed through the flues, scraped, scorched, and scarred. Some survived, many did not. And for all of them, the chimneys were not just narrow brick shafts. They were tunnels into adulthood, forced far too soon. Now, imagine yourself walking the uneven cobbled streets of a northern English town in the mid-19th century. The air carries a blend of coal, soot, chimney smoke, and rain-dampened stone. A few curtains flutter in cracked window panes, and gas lamps glow dimly against the encroaching dusk. Children play in muddy yards, their laughter edged with coughs. Mothers draw water from shared pumps. Life is frugal, repetitive, sometimes warm, but always precarious. In this unremarkable world lived a woman who was, at first glance, equally unremarkable. Mary Ann Cotton. Her name wouldn't make the papers for years. Not until far too many graves had been filled. Born in 1832 in the industrial region of Low Moorsley, County Durham, Mary Ann was raised in the soot-black shadow of coal pits. Her father was a miner, a dangerous job then. As Nan, when she was just a child, he fell to his death down a shaft. The family, like many others, relied on irregular charity and strict thrift to get by. Her mother remarried. Mary Ann grew up quiet, dutiful, well-mannered. She became a nursemaid, then trained as a dressmaker. Eventually, she entered domestic service, her days defined by laundry, floor scrubbing, and watching others eat from fine china while she ate in the kitchen. She married at age 20 to a man named William Mowbray, a fellow from the Navy. Together, they had several children. Some accounts say as many as 9, others fewer. But the records are foggy with loss. You see, one by one, those children died. The causes, always vague: fever, bowel complaints, colic. In the Victorian era, such diagnoses were like the shifting wind, impressive and all-encompassing. It was not uncommon for a mother to lose 1 or 2 children, but 5, 7. Still, no one asked. When William Mowbray himself died suddenly in 1865, the doctor attributed it to intestinal inflammation. Mary Ann, now a widow with at least one surviving child, collected an insurance payment and moved on. She remarried. Another man, another child, another sudden death. Again and again and again. For husbands would ultimately meet their end while married to her. She was often in mourning, often relocating. One town to the next, always northward Sunderland, Seaham Harbour, South Hetton, West Auckland. Her life was a string of modest lodgings, hand-me-down furniture, and sudden funerals. The pattern was the same. She cared lovingly for her children, husbands, or elderly relatives until they fell ill. She consulted the doctor, brewed broth, spooned medicine. Then came the final breath, the black dress, and a quiet visit to the local insurance office. In these working-class towns, death came easily. Arsenic, in small amounts, was a household staple used to poison rats, to bleach linens, even in certain green pigments found in wallpaper and dresses. Sold freely at the chemist, it could be mixed into porridge, stirred into tea, or dissolved in beer. Its effects mimicked dysentery, typhoid, or cholera. In homes without plumbing, clean water, or refrigeration, nobody blinked when illness struck. But the sheer number of funerals surrounding Mary Ann could not remain invisible forever. It was the death of a young boy, Charles Edward Cotton, her stepson, that finally stirred suspicion. By this time, it was 1872. Mary Ann had approached the local parish to claim a death benefit for the child. She explained that Charles had died of a sudden illness, but the local official, Thomas Riley, had heard murmurs. He refused to sign the papers. An autopsy followed. The body, examined carefully by local doctors, revealed arsenic in the stomach enough to kill a grown man. It was the first definitive proof. And once investigators began to piece her history together, the magnitude became impossible to ignore. They unearthed a staggering pattern. At least 21 people may have died in her orbit. Husbands, children, step-parents, friends. Each had suffered gastrointestinal symptoms, vomiting, cramping, fevers, and each had been cared for by Mary Ann. Many had small life insurance policies attached. She was arrested in July 1872. At her trial the following March, she denied everything. Her demeanor was described as serene. She wore mourning black. She rarely wept. She answered questions softly, always with respect. The jury deliberated for just under an hour. She was found guilty of the murder of young Charles Cotton, though investigators were certain she had taken many more lives. And so, on March 24, 1873, Mary Ann Cotton was hanged at Durham Jail. The rope was short. Death came slowly. Her story faded quickly, perhaps because it was too quiet, too domestic, too chillingly ordinary. There were no knives, no alleyways, no screaming, just spoonfuls of poisoned gruel, and a woman in black who wiped tears from her eyes at just the right moment. Imagine a gray morning in 1850s London. The sky is low and overcast, drizzling just enough to slick the cobblestones, but not enough to bring the city to a pause. You hear the slow clatter of wooden wheels, the distant call of a street vendor, and the quiet shuffling of worn boots. At the edge of the borough, beyond rows of brick terraces, sits a building that looks more like a prison than a place of help. It's square, symmetrical, and grim. Iron gates, high walls, narrow windows. Above the arched entrance, a small placard reads simply, Union Workhouse. To the desperate, this is both refuge and warning. Let's step inside, gently, and understand what life was like within these walls, not through statistics, but through sensation. The first thing you'd notice is the smell, a mix of boiled oats, disinfectant, unwashed linen, and human closeness. Not offensive, exactly, but stale, institutional. The air hangs heavy in shared dormitories, where dozens of men or women lie on straw-stuffed mattresses, shoulder to shoulder. The workhouse was not a shelter in the modern sense. It was an institution of last resort, a final option when all else had failed, and it was designed not to comfort but to discourage. The Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834 reshaped England's approach to poverty. Parliament declared that aid should be granted only in exchange for labor strict, grueling, and public. Outdoor relief, where the poor were supported in their homes, was to be replaced by indoor relief. The workhouse. The logic was cold. If the poor received comfort without cost, it would encourage laziness. But if conditions were deliberately harsh, only the truly needy would apply. And so the system was born. Upon entry, families were separated, cruelty as consistent as the meals. Husbands to one wing, wives to another. Children split off and assigned to age-graded dorms. Siblings parted. Mothers forbidden to hold their babies after dusk. You wore a uniform, ate in silence. Lived by bell and schedule. Breakfast at 6. Gruel or porridge. Work from 7 until noon. Lunch, a boiled potato, perhaps bread. More labor until evening. Supper, tea without milk, and sometimes nothing at all. Men might be assigned to stone breaking or crushing bones for fertilizer. Women might scrub laundry for hours or pick apart old rope called oakum into individual fibers. Children were set to menial tasks, sweeping, sewing, sorting scraps. It wasn't that the work was productive. Often it was designed simply to occupy and exhaust. Discipline was strict. A talking infraction at meals might cost you your supper. Showing disrespect to a master could earn you confinement or public rebuke. And for the elderly or infirm, there was little accommodation. You worked if you could. If not, you lay still. Yet within these grim walls, life went on. Some inmates, called paupers, stayed only briefly. Perhaps a mother during a harsh winter, or a widowed father after losing work. But many were long-term residents, known by name, whose lives had slowly unraveled through age, injury, or simple bad luck. The matrons and overseers were not always cruel. Some were indifferent, others quietly kind. A few broke rules to sneak children an extra crust of bread, or turned their eyes away when old friends whispered after lights out. But even these small acts could not erase the stigma. To enter a workhouse was to admit failure, not just privately, but publicly. Your name was recorded, your belongings taken. You were registered like a criminal. Outside the walls, neighbors spoke in hushed tones. "She's in the house now," they'd say. Or worse, "They've put her away." Inside, the rhythm of existence dulled the days into sameness. The highlight of the week was Sunday chapel, not for the sermon, but for the chance to see loved ones across the aisle, however briefly. Eyes might meet, a child might wave, then back to your wing. Over time, reforms crept in. In the late 1800s, critics began to speak out. Journalists, clergy, and social reformers who visited the workhouses and wrote what they saw. One such voice was Charles Dickens, whose novels painted vivid pictures of life at the edge of society. Others were quiet witnesses, doctors who recorded the emaciated bodies, inspectors who noted the decay, and paupers themselves who left behind memoirs scrawled on rough paper. By the turn of the 20th century, the workhouse system had begun to erode. Public sentiment shifted. A slow wave of compassion began to replace the cold calculus of deterrence. New institutions emerged: hospitals, almshouses, shelters designed with care rather than punishment. And yet the legacy lingered. Even today, in British speech, the word workhouse carries a chill, a memory of being judged, counted, controlled. A place where need was met with scrutiny and dignity was optional. So imagine again, if you can, lying in a narrow bed beneath a thin blanket, the clang of a distant bell echoing through stone corridors, the smell of boiled cabbage rising through floorboards, somewhere a child crying in sleep, a woman murmuring her prayers. This, too, was Victorian life. Now, drift gently with me from the soot-blackened walls of the workhouse to a very different world, one just a few streets away, but an entire reality apart. It is early evening. The gaslights have just flickered on along the street, and their faint amber glow spills across polished cobblestones. A carriage rolls past, drawn by two dapple-gray horses, their hooves rhythmically striking the stone. You approach a 3-story townhouse, cream stucco facade, wrought iron railings, neatly trimmed box hedges. Inside, through tall windows, the glow of light and the faint sound of music suggest warmth and refinement. This is the home of a successful merchant family, and you are about to step into their drawing room, the center of upper-middle-class life in Victorian England. You are greeted with politeness, ushered in with gloved hands. The hallway smells faintly of beeswax polish and rosewater. A tall grandfather clock ticks steadily. Portraits hang on papered walls. Silence is soft here, almost curated. The drawing room itself is on the first floor, front-facing. As you enter, the contrast to the world outside is immediate. The wallpaper is floral and embossed, probably imported. A fire crackles in the hearth, casting soft light on mahogany furniture cushioned with embroidered velvet. There is a faint aroma of Tyrol grey or perhaps Darjeeling mingling with the smoke from a delicate taper candle set in a brass sconce. Here, conversation is quiet but assured. A gentleman in a tailored waistcoat stands near the mantel, swirling his brandy slowly. His wife, seated on a chaise longue, gently fans herself despite the cool air. She wears a gown of modest silk, her collar high, her sleeves long, fashionable but correct. Guests, perhaps 2 or 3, sit in carved chairs, their posture upright, their voices low. They speak of the opera, of the recent column in the Times, of the new reforms being debated in Parliament. But beneath the civility, something more subtle thrums: social performance. You see, the Victorian drawing room is not just a space for rest, it is a stage. Every item in view: a piano topped with sheet music, a vase of dried lavender, a porcelain clock from France's, something not only about wealth, but about taste, refinement, and above all, morality. The Victorians prided themselves not merely on having things, but on being virtuous in how they acquired, displayed, and discussed them. The drawing room was the showcase of this performance. Paintings on the wall depicted calm landscapes, idealized domestic scenes. Nothing controversial, nothing unsettling. Even literature had to uphold the mood of virtue. Ladies might engage in needlework, their fingers nimble but never rushed. Gentlemen might discuss investments or the rising cost of gaslight. Children, if allowed to visit briefly, were to sit silently and speak only when addressed. All of this unfolded with a kind of gentle choreography. But behind the elegance was a truth rarely acknowledged aloud. This comfort depended on the labor of others, often invisible, often poor. While the merchant family sipped tea in porcelain cups, it was the housemaid who polished the silver, the cook who toiled in a sweltering kitchen, the boy who scrubbed the front steps before dawn, and beyond the house, the factory workers, the coal miners, the ship hands who moved the goods that built the family fortune. The hosts knew this, of course, but it was not polite to dwell on such things. Instead, there was charity donations to local churches, fundraisers for orphanages, polite concern for the lower classes, perhaps a Christmas hamper for the poor, perhaps a visit to the sick with a chaperone. This was the paradox of the Victorian elite. Sincere compassion, tightly corseted by decorum. Emotional restraint was a virtue. Passion, unless patriotic or religious, was suspect. And so, the drawing room existed as both comfort and barrier. The strikes, the hunger was held at bay by lace curtains and moral superiority. But even here, change was creeping. The younger generation, exposed to new ideas through literature, through travel, through politics, began to question labor rights, the suffragette cause. A few rebelled outright, moving to the continent, writing novels, joining movements. Still, many remained anchored in this familiar rhythm: polished shoes, cooled tea, measured words. As the fire burned low, and the maid entered with a tray of tea cakes, a gentleman might look out toward the foggy street beyond and remark on the greatness of Britain, unaware, perhaps unwilling to admit how many were suffering just out of sight. And yet, the drawing room was not cruel, it was not evil, it was simply blind, wrapped in its own comforts, whispering quietly as the world beyond its doors stirred restlessly. Now let the image fade, the gleam of silver under gaslight, the soft click of a teacup on a saucer, the rustle of a newspaper, and the warm hush of a fire slowly settling into embers. Now that our journey is drawing to a close, take a slow breath. Let the fog of coal, smoke, and candlelight fade gently into the stillness of the present. We've wandered today through streets slick with soot, climbed narrow chimneys with trembling hands, followed the quiet horror of a woman lost in shadows, and walked the echoing halls of the workhouse. We've also sat in embroidered chairs, watched silver spoons glint beneath gaslight, and observed a world cocooned in comfort and conviction. In the story of Victorian Britain, there is no single truth, only layers. Lives lived at different speeds, some pressed beneath the weight of survival, others floating through rooms trimmed in velvet and lace. But each had their rhythm, their quiet routines, their fears and small comforts. History is often told as noise of revolutions and great inventions of empire and ambition. But beneath the headlines, it is more often the soft tread of bare feet on worn floorboards, the hush of breath in cold alleys, the rustle of a letter being opened by firelight. And it is in that quiet that we begin to understand. Tonight, as you lie still, know this: the past is not so far. Its echoes hum softly beneath the modern world, beneath the traffic and electricity and warm beds. It hums in forgotten names, in habits passed down, in the way we still organize our cities, our work, even our morality. But unlike the soot-stained tenements or candlelit parlors, your world tonight is safe, warm, quiet. Let the lives of those who came before hard, as they offer you contrast, not burden. Let them remind you that you are here, you are safe, you are resting. Close your eyes now. Let the coal fires dim, let the gaslight fade, and let the past drift away, softly and slowly, into silence.